Have you ever wondered what secrets old houses might be hiding? Sometimes, the past refuses to stay buried, and the walls themselves seem to whisper stories of sorrow and fear. Today, we're diving deep into a chilling tale where a house isn't just haunted. It's alive, and it's ready to reveal the truth it's been hiding for centuries. Get ready for a journey into darkness that you won't forget. They thought the house was haunted, until the walls bled the truth. Emma and James had never been the type to believe in ghosts or superstition. They were grounded people, shaped by hard work and the tangible world around them. But that cold, autumn evening as they stood in front of the old Victorian mansion, on the edge of a forgotten New England town, something inexplicable gripped their hearts with icy fingers. The house was a relic from another century, an imposing structure with towering turrets and sweeping gables, crowned with intricate woodwork faded by decades of wind and rain. Its once white paint was cracked and peeling, exposing dark, weathered boards beneath. The windows were tall and narrow, many panes fractured or clouded with grime. The front porch sagged unevenly, its wooden steps groaning under the weight of memories. As Emma reached out to touch the heavy oak door, a sudden gust of wind stirred fallen leaves at her feet. The air smelled damp and metallic, a scent she couldn't place but that seemed to seep from the house itself. James tightened his grip on her hand. "Are we really doing this?" he asked quietly. Emma nodded, her eyes reflecting a strange mixture of hope and dread. They had left behind the noise and heartbreak of their past lives, searching for a fresh start. This house, abandoned for decades, was their chance, a refuge from the ghosts they carried inside themselves. But what they didn't know was that the house had ghosts of its own. Stepping inside, the floorboards creaked beneath their feet, echoing through empty halls lined with faded wallpaper stained by time. Dust particles floated in the shafts of late afternoon sunlight, illuminating cobwebs that clung like tattered veils to chandeliers and banisters. The silence was overwhelming. Emma's footsteps disturbed it, yet the house seemed to absorb the sound, swallowing their presence whole. That night, as they unpacked in their new home, strange things began to happen. A faint whispering, like fabric rustling or breath caught in a distant throat, brushed against Emma's ears. She paused, heart racing, but the sound vanished before James could hear it. Later, the lights flickered unpredictably, casting long, jittery shadows that danced on the walls. Doors creaked open slowly, then slammed shut as if pushed by unseen hands. Emma swore she saw a shadow move at the edge of her vision, but when she turned, there was nothing but darkness. One morning, James discovered scratches on the floorboards near the cellar stairs. Deep gouges that looked like claw marks arranged in a pattern neither of them could decipher. The wood was splintered, raw beneath a thin layer of dust. That night, Emma was jolted awake by a pounding noise coming from the basement. Against every instinct, she crept down the steps with a flashlight, her breath fogging in the chilly air. The beam revealed a dark red stain spreading along the wall, fresh, glistening, and unmistakably like blood. She screamed. James rushed down, and together they stood frozen, staring at the wall that seemed to weep its own torment. Desperation drove them to investigate the house's past. Local archives told stories of the Whitmore family, who built the mansion in 1884. The Whitmores were wealthy but reclusive, shrouded in scandal. Several family members died under mysterious circumstances. Some declared insane, others vanished without a trace. More chilling were the rumors of occult rituals conducted in the dead of night, meant to bind the family to the house forever. The locals whispered that the house itself was alive, feeding on pain, trapping souls in an endless nightmare. Emma found a hidden compartment beneath a loose floorboard. Inside was a journal, its brittle pages filled with frantic handwriting and dark confessions. The last entry read, "The house takes what it needs. It drinks sorrow like water and binds the broken with blood. Beware the bleeding walls. They are the heart's cry of 1,000 lost souls." Sleep became a battleground. Emma's dreams were haunted by faces pressed against the walls, silent and desperate. Hands clawed through plaster, begging for release. Whispers called her name in voices both familiar and alien. James's skepticism shattered as he too succumbed to sleepless nights and growing paranoia. The house's presence became suffocating, an ever-watchful, malevolent force. They realized with mounting horror that this was no mere home. It was a prison, a living nightmare, and the walls were ready to tell their story. The days following the horrifying revelation of the bleeding walls marked the beginning of a descent into madness for Emma and James. The Whitmore house was no longer merely a forgotten relic of the past. It had awoken, alive with an ancient and malevolent presence that hungered for more than silence. Every corner, every creak, every breath of air seemed charged with an otherworldly intent, as if the very fabric of the house pulsed with pain and anger. At first, the bloodstains were sporadic, small, almost insignificant. Fresh, dark crimson streaks would mysteriously appear overnight on the cellar walls, creeping up the plaster like veins spreading through flesh. Emma would wake to find new splotches that seemed to shimmer faintly in the moonlight filtering through the grimy windows. It was as though the house itself was bleeding, mourning some unspeakable tragedy locked deep within its bones. The physical manifestations were just the beginning. Emma's nights became a battleground where sleep was a fleeting luxury. In dreams so vivid they felt like memories, she saw the faces of the Whitmore family pressed desperately against the walls, their eyes sunken and filled with torment. Silent screams seemed to echo endlessly in her mind, while icy hands reached from the walls to clutch at her, leaving scratches and bruises she could still feel when she awoke, gasping for air. James tried to hold on to reason, but his skepticism was eroding fast. He spent hours roaming the house, clutching a notebook as he meticulously documented every strange noise, every flicker of light, every fleeting shadow. The once orderly man was now haunted, his dark eyes hollow and rimmed with exhaustion. Portraits of the stern-faced Whitmore ancestors seemed to watch his every move, their painted gazes accusatory and knowing. One afternoon, James discovered an old, dust-covered trunk in the attic, hidden beneath tattered tarps and broken furniture. Inside, he found a bundle of brittle letters tied with a faded crimson ribbon. The letters were penned by Abigail Whitmore, the last known family member, who disappeared under mysterious circumstances nearly a century ago. Her handwriting, though elegant, trembled with fear and madness, revealing a soul unraveling beneath the weight of a dreadful secret. Through her letters, Abigail described a terrible pact made generations ago, a covenant with an entity older than time itself, an ancient force bound to the land and the house. This dark power demanded sacrifices in blood, ceremonies performed in the dead of night to ensure its continued dominion. The family was trapped, their souls tethered to the house's very foundation. "The house is a living thing," Abigail wrote. "It drinks sorrow and pain like poison. It hungers not only for blood but for your very essence, your sanity, your life. Beware the bleeding walls. They are the house's heart, crying out for what was taken." Armed with this chilling knowledge, Emma and James installed cameras throughout the house, desperate to capture evidence, to prove to themselves that they had not lost their minds. The footage terrified them. Shadows flickered just beyond the camera's field of view. Doors creaked open and slammed shut of their own accord. Wisps of mist drifted silently through rooms, appearing and disappearing like restless spirits. One clip showed a splash of vivid red streak across a wall, only to vanish seconds later as if swallowed by the house itself. Their bodies weakened, their minds frayed. Sleep became a distant memory. Emma's hands shook as she pored over arcane texts and obscure manuscripts, searching for cleansing rites or protective symbols that might sever the house's hold. James's paranoia deepened, voices whispering threats and promises of doom echoing in his ears when no one else was near. In a desperate plea for help, they contacted Helen, a local historian and expert in occult lore. Helen entered the house with cautious reverence. The oppressive energy was palpable, crushing even the air they breathed. She delved into archives, uncovering the land's cursed history, long before the Whitmores arrived. The property had been the site of pagan rituals, blood sacrifices, and unspeakable acts that opened dark doorways to forces beyond human understanding. Helen warned that the entity residing in the house was cunning and cruel, feeding on fear and grief to grow stronger. Breaking the curse would require a direct confrontation with the entity, a trial that could cost everything they held dear. That very night, the house erupted with fury. Emma was jolted awake by the sound of shattering glass and pounding footsteps echoing through the halls. The temperature plunged precipitously. Their breaths formed icy clouds in the frigid air. Doors slammed violently, the floor trembling beneath their feet as if the house itself was alive, breathing in rage and pain. Amid the chaos, Emma glimpsed a towering shadow with glowing eyes moving with cruel, unnatural speed and purpose. It pressed itself against the walls, which then bled anew, dark rivulets pouring down like tears of fury and sorrow. Bruised, terrified, yet unbroken, Emma and James realized they were not merely victims of a haunting. They were combatants in a war for their very souls. Guided by Helen, they learned ancient rites that could possibly sever the entity's hold. The rituals demanded sacred symbols, specific timing aligned with lunar cycles, and a resolve stronger than fear. Failure meant eternal imprisonment within the bleeding walls, doomed to become part of the house's sorrowful legacy. As the nights wore on, the house's assaults grew relentless. Reality warped and twisted, walls bled with fresh wounds. Disembodied voices whispered sins and secrets. Apparitions preyed on their darkest fears. The boundary between the living and the dead blurred. Emma was tormented by the traumas she had buried, the tragic deaths of her parents, the crushing despair she had hidden away. James relived the agonizing final moments of his brother's life over and over, each iteration more horrifying than the last. But through it all, they clung to each other. Their love and determination burned like a beacon in the ever-deepening darkness. The walls were bleeding, but so was their hope. The house's dreadful story was far from over. The relentless onslaught from the Whitmore house was no longer a distant horror. It was a suffocating, inescapable reality. Emma and James found themselves trapped in a waking nightmare where every breath, every shadow, every creak of the old mansion threatened to pull them deeper into darkness. Since the first terrifying discovery of the bleeding walls, their world had crumbled. The crimson stains that once appeared sporadically now coursed through the house like veins, spreading over ceilings, door frames, and the worn staircases, pulsing with an unnatural life force. The house was alive, and its pain was contagious, infecting every corner with sorrow and rage. Emma's nights became a war zone. Sleep fled from her grasp as the lines between dreams and reality blurred. Night after night, her dreams were invaded by the tortured Whitmore ancestors. Their gaunt faces, sunken eyes filled with despair, pressed desperately against the walls. Their silent screams echoed through her mind, while icy, skeletal hands clawed at her flesh, leaving raw wounds that throbbed with cold fire long after she awoke. The whispers in the house were no longer faint murmurs. They were voices, pleading, accusing, and sometimes cruelly mocking, weaving a dark symphony of fear that consumed her. James was unraveling in his own way. The man who once prided himself on logic and order found himself adrift in a sea of madness. His days were spent in restless pacing and frantic note-taking, attempting to document every eerie sound, every flicker of shadow, every inexplicable cold spot. The portraits of the stern Whitmore ancestors, once mere decorations, now seemed to follow him with sinister intent, their painted eyes gleaming with malevolence. He combed through dusty town archives, uncovering fragmented tales of madness, murder, and disappearance, whispered in the shadows of local lore. In the attic, beneath layers of dust and cobwebs, James found a fragile bundle of letters tied with a faded red ribbon. They were penned by Abigail Whitmore, the last known member of the cursed family, who vanished nearly a century ago without a trace. Her elegant script trembled with fear and insanity, telling a story of an ancient pact forged with a malevolent force bound to the land and the house itself. Abigail's letters spoke of blood sacrifices and midnight rituals intended to tether the family's souls to the house's dark heart. securing power but condemning them to eternal torment. "The house is alive," she wrote. "It drinks sorrow and pain like poison. It hungers not only for blood but for the very essence of those trapped within. Beware the bleeding walls. They are the heart's sorrow bleeding out." Desperate for proof, Emma and James installed cameras throughout the house, hoping to capture evidence of the supernatural. The footage chilled them to the bone. Shadows flickered just beyond the frame, doors creaked open and slammed shut on their own, and ghostly mists drifted silently through rooms. One recording caught a vivid splash of red streaming down a wall, disappearing moments later as if swallowed by the darkness. Their physical and mental states deteriorated rapidly. Emma's trembling hands pored over ancient grimoires, seeking cleansing rites and protective wards that might sever the house's grip. James's paranoia deepened, as whispers only he could hear promised doom should they resist or attempt to flee. Their last hope lay with Helen, a local historian and expert in occult lore. Helen entered the house cautiously but was immediately overwhelmed by its suffocating presence. She uncovered a dark history, revealing the land's long-standing curse, blood rituals, sacrificial offerings, and arcane magics predating the Whitmores by centuries. The entity within was cunning, cruel, and insatiable, thriving on pain and fear. Helen warned them that only a direct confrontation could free them from the entity's grasp, a trial that would demand their utmost courage and sacrifice. That night, the house erupted into chaos. Emma awoke to the sound of shattering glass and pounding footsteps reverberating through the halls. The temperature plummeted. Their breaths billowed in freezing clouds. Doors slammed violently. The floor vibrated beneath them, echoing the monstrous heartbeat of the house itself. Amid the chaos, Emma glimpsed a towering shadow with glowing eyes moving with cruel intent. It pressed itself against the walls, which bled anew, dark rivulets pouring like tears of fury and sorrow. Bruised, terrified, but unbroken, Emma and James stood firm. Guided by Helen, they prepared to perform the binding of shadows, a desperate ritual requiring sacred symbols, relics, and unyielding courage. Failure meant eternal imprisonment within the bleeding walls. The entity fought with all its might, twisting reality, whispering sins, manifesting phantoms that preyed on their deepest fears. Emma's buried traumas surfaced. Her parents' tragic deaths, moments of despair twisted into living nightmares. James relived his brother's death in excruciating detail. Through it all, their love endured, a beacon in the darkness. As the ritual climaxed, the bleeding walls began to dry, the shadows receded, and a fragile silence fell. They had survived. But the house's dreadful story was far from over. The weight of the Whitmore house pressed upon Emma and James like a living thing, every creak of its ancient timbers, every whisper in the shadows a reminder that their fight was far from over. The house held centuries of darkness, a boundless sorrow that clung to its walls and seeped into their very souls. They had survived the binding of shadows ritual, but the cost was staggering, and the price would be paid in ways neither of them had anticipated. For days after the ritual, silence reigned. The bleeding walls ceased their weeping, the oppressive air lifted slightly, and a fragile peace seemed to settle. But it was a deceptive calm. Beneath the surface, the house was gathering strength, its secrets coiling like a serpent ready to strike. Emma woke each morning feeling the residual cold clawing at her bones. Her dreams were haunted by shadows that whispered names and places she could barely recall, and the faces of the Whitmore family appeared in every reflection, their hollow eyes accusing and sorrowful. She could still feel the icy touch of those spectral hands, and the faint echo of their cries haunted the edges of her waking thoughts. James wrestled with his own demons. The visions of his brother's final moments haunted him relentlessly, vivid and raw, a wound that refused to heal. His nights were plagued by restless pacing and murmured prayers, clutching relics and symbols he hoped would shield them from the lingering darkness. Together, they tried to rebuild their lives, but the house's curse had marked them indelibly. Friends and neighbors saw only a couple emerging from a harrowing experience, but Emma and James knew the truth. the house's shadow was not so easily banished. Helen visited often, bringing books, artifacts, and knowledge. She warned them that the binding of shadows was a temporary reprieve, a fragile truce at best. The house's entity was ancient and cunning, its hunger insatiable. It would return, testing their resolve and seeking new ways to claim what it desired. One evening, as twilight settled over the town, Emma heard a faint dripping sound echoing through the halls. Her heart clenched. The bleeding walls had started again. But this time, the blood was darker, thicker, more deliberate. It formed patterns on the walls, symbols of warning and power that seemed to pulse with malevolence. James found new scratches on the floorboards near the cellar, deeper and fresher than before, arranged in a pattern neither of them could decipher. The house was sending a message, a reminder that it was still watching, still waiting. Their relationship was strained under the weight of fear and trauma. Arguments erupted over the smallest things, guilt and frustration simmering beneath every word. Yet, in moments of quiet, they found solace in each other's arms, a fragile bond holding them together against the encroaching darkness. Helen suggested they seek out a reclusive medium rumored to possess the ability to communicate with restless spirits. Desperate for answers, Emma and James agreed. The medium's cottage lay on the outskirts of town, surrounded by ancient oaks that whispered in the wind. Inside, the air was thick with incense and the scent of herbs. The woman, with piercing eyes and a calm demeanor, listened as they recounted their ordeal. She warned them that the entity feeding on the Whitmore house was a tormentor, a collector of souls who had grown powerful through centuries of pain and sacrifice. To truly free themselves and the trapped spirits, they would have to face it again, this time not with ancient rites alone, but with the strength to forgive and release the past. The medium prepared them for a séance, a journey into the spirit world to confront the entity on its own ground. Emma and James felt a mixture of hope and dread as they returned to the house, knowing that the coming night could bring salvation or destruction. As darkness fell, they gathered in the chamber once again. Candles flickered, casting shadows that danced like specters. The medium began the ritual, her voice steady as the veil between worlds thinned. Visions surged, a torrent of memories and emotions. Emma saw the Whitmore family's tragedies unfold, the sacrifices, betrayals, and despair etched into the house's very stones. James was drawn into a vortex of grief, reliving his brother's final moments alongside the tortured souls trapped within. The entity manifested, a towering shadow writhing with rage and sorrow. It screamed accusations and warnings, its voice a chorus of anguish. But this time Emma and James stood firm. They spoke words of forgiveness not just for the entity, but for themselves. They released the chains of guilt and pain that bound them. Light pierced the darkness. The entity's form shimmered and dissipated, its rage turning to sorrow, then peace. The house sighed, a long, shuddering breath as the oppressive weight lifted. The bleeding walls dried completely, the shadows receded, and silence returned, this time true and lasting. Emma and James embraced, tears flowing freely as they realized the nightmare was over. The Whitmore house still stood, a monument to tragedy and resilience. But now its story was one of healing and hope. Their battle had ended, but their journey toward peace was just beginning. Thank you for joining us on this haunting journey. If you enjoyed the story, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you won't miss more chilling tales like this. Remember, sometimes the most terrifying secrets are hidden right where we least expect them. Stay curious, stay safe, and we'll see you in the next story.